Hello, and welcome to the Mental Health and series. Today we are joined by Darilyn Bixenman from Colorado. She has worked over 20 years in the field of counseling psychology. Welcome, Darilyn.
Well, thank you, Krista. It's just a pleasure to be here, and I'm so grateful that you asked me to come on.
Yes, a couple of years ago we met at the Given Institute. It was in Philly, right?
Yes, it was.
We were probably unloading stuff or unpacking. I think we were there maybe a little earlier than the participants.
Yeah.
And you said something that struck me. You said that you've been in counseling for over 20 years and that you even worked with people who survived the Columbine shooting. And you
Yeah.
found that in your practice, people were more anxious, less resilient than those people that you served all those years ago. I think the anniversary just passed. Actually, my friend was in
Yeah, April
Denver.
20th. Yeah. 99 was when that happened, if you can believe that.
When you said that to me, it just struck me that this idea that we're even more anxious and perhaps without the experience of something like a mass shooting on a campus, that's wild.
Right, right. My current practice is in Littleton, Colorado. So we're about 3 miles from Columbine High School. And unfortunately, it is the monument, if you will, to the first thing that started off like a series of shootings that was going to happen for the next 25 years after that. So that kind of started it all. Myself and a lot of other counselors in the area were on the front lines that night, as well as serving those teenagers afterwards, providing counsel to them. And you're right, I saw a lot of PTSD symptoms that you would expect from someone who has gone through a shooting. They did respond very, very well to talk therapy, treatment, and support, and those kinds of things. And I'm just not seeing that today. I'm seeing higher levels of anxiety, less resilience, more PTSD symptoms. But the difference is that there's the absence of a shooting, a mass shooting, or a trauma, or any of those kinds of things, that the anxiety is kind of disproportionate to what they're experiencing in their life.
Yeah, in our pre-interview, you talked about big T trauma. Can you go into more detail about that?
Trauma is something that excites the fight or flight process system in our brains, in our limbic system. And it is a God-given creation that we have the fight or flight. It is a beautiful thing. The stress response is a good thing. And so we use it in a lot of ways to help us navigate our way through our humanity and life, right? When something happens that we interpret it or internalize it as exciting the fight or flight, we experience those things that happen. We have increased anxiety, we have nightmares, we have flashback thoughts, as if the trauma or the event is happening to us all over again, right? So we consider those kind of big T traumas that are really impactful in our lives that we can't seem to get over without some help and support. And a shooting obviously is a huge big T trauma. Car accidents are big T traumas. Anything where your life is completely stopped for moments or hours at a time, and your life is forever impacted after that. Yeah.
So I think some people might be listening and hearing big T trauma or the fight or flight response, the stress response is a good thing. No, it doesn't feel like a good thing. So can you
Right.
explain why you think it, well, you said it's God given, and I agree with you, but can you go into details why you think it's a good thing?
Because it is what will help a mother lift a car up off of her child if a child was pinned underneath. It would be a response that if we were in a tornado, we would help ourselves, our families, and the neighbors get to safety. And we wouldn't even think twice about it. And we could go a couple of days without food. We could get enough adrenaline to run pretty fast to safety. I mean, it's there for us to motivate us to help and help ourselves and help others, right? So in that way, it is a good thing. In the presence of something that we need to that we need to really escape from. It is not a good thing, however, when there's not the presence of a tornado or a flood, a
Mm-hmm.
shooting, when the fight or flight system is going off all the time, when you're sitting at your office, at your desk in your office trying to do your work. So that's probably, that anxiety and that anxiousness is probably, not something that is comfortable for most people. Absolutely.
Yeah, so it's like that the after the flight or fight, like if it's remaining, then there's probably
Yes.
something that needs treatment. What do you think contributes to the fact that we're a more anxious, maybe millennial and Gen Z? most anxious generations. So what do you think contributed to that?
Well, there's a lot of different theories, and I have my own. What they're calling now, Jonathan Haidt, who wrote a book called The Anxious Generation, right? He's a social psychologist, and so he's gathered a lot of data from all the way back to the mid '80s to until now to see kind of what happened. And a lot of different variables have happened. He says that the parents in the '80s overprotected their children in a lot of really unhealthy ways and underprotected them then in the 90s and 2000s when the internet came on board, and underprotected them in that way, primarily because they as adults were using the internet and didn't want to stop using the internet and thought it was okay for their children to use it as well, right? That's one theory. My theory right now is that the presence of social media is only part of the game, I think. I think for all of us, because there's a whole bunch of people that don't use social media, that aren't on social media, could care less about likes or dislikes, right? But it's the amount of information that is being thrown at us instantaneously that our minds and our emotions are unable to digest and process at a slower cadence. We have to process too much too fast. And if we can't do that, then our brain does feel like it needs to act in a way that is in fight or flight, right? So it perceives it, it internalizes it as this is important, it is significant, it is crucial, you must act now, you must do something. And if you don't, then it might be life or death, right? Even if it's just a newsreel, or a feed on something, right? And it's very instantaneous and hard for this generation that didn't grow up with a newspaper, right?
Mm-hmm.
to really kind of navigate through.
Yeah, I certainly felt that during COVID. In the beginning days of COVID, it was like, we don't know what's happening, so we have to stay informed and we have to look at all moments and we have to look at the rate of everything that's spreading and the death toll. And I got to a point where I realized, wait, this is not good for me. This is actually really hard to like keep up, to stay up to date and stay informed. And I think information is a good thing
Yeah.
in moderation. And I think, I experienced that in COVID, that I couldn't keep the news on like that and look at every single post about COVID. And especially in those first few weeks when you kind of had nowhere else to go except the
Right.
internet.
I think conflicting information too. And
Yes.
we still have that, so even in our wonderful Catholic community, there'll be a something on our Holy Father, and then there'll be 50 different takes on that and information that is coming our way. One says one thing and then another post says another thing. And we have to figure out instantaneously what we think, feel, and believe.
Mm-hmm.
Um, we can't do that. We're not designed to do that. And so the pressure, I think, that the millennials and Gen Zers have to figure things out quickly is too much.
Like you're saying too, like I see the reaction culture on YouTube and stuff, like comedians make fun of it, that it's not just about let's look at something, but it's like let's react to the new Taylor Swift album, and
Right.
then and recorded and published, like you said, like that instantaneous decision making. I feel like I usually need time to process things. In fact, at the Given Institute, when Roe versus Wade was overturned,
Mhm.
like I saw people putting all of their opinions on the internet immediately. And like I kind of did the same thing too. Like that day, I actually had to leave the Given forum for like a couple of hours to process it myself, even though I'm pro-life. I could see like the pain of people who disagree with that
Right.
decision. And so I went to my room for a couple of hours, wrote a little song, and I was
Mhm.
like, I don't have anything to say, but here's what I have to sing. And I shared that. Yeah, I remember someone asking me, like, in the pro-life movement, like, do you still think what you said in the song? And I said, yeah, because it's a little more like I can see why you feel that way. Don't vilify either
Right.
side. And
Right.
that's kind of what the song was saying. And that was the way that I was reacting. But it's still like I made a song. It was like it was
Right.
a
Right.
process.
You had to process it that way, and that was very healthy. And that doesn't occur to a lot of people, right? Especially to take time for themselves to process something. They just keep scrolling,
Yeah.
right? And that's where they're going to find or try to find answers to what they're thinking, feeling, and believing.
Mm.
So back to, the PTSD diagnosis, that was originally reserved for two populations of people: war vets, people that were experiencing war, and journalists that were on the front lines watching the war, reporting on the war.
Oh,
So,
wow.
right? So you think those were the two populations that were being diagnosed only, right? And now how many people, probably 1 out of 3 people have a diagnosis of PTSD, right?
Wow. Like we're all on the front lines because of
We're
the
on the
internet.
front lines. And there's a term that soldiers would use, and that is a term called hypervigilance, right? So it
Mm.
is a term that you can't go to sleep. You have to be the night watchman. You have to be on guard all the time because you're on the front lines and something might happen. Well, that's true in that respect. What I'm finding now is that the external focus in our worlds for everyone is hypervigilant. We are so attuned to what everybody else is doing and thinking and feeling in the external world that we've lost connection with how to be internal, right?
Mm.
So when you're saying I took 2 hours to process and I went internal to see how I really thought about it, away from any information that was being thrown at me, that is something that's kind of rare. I'm not seeing that. And part of the work that I'm doing in trauma and anxiety is to get back to, especially for women, to internally connect with, okay, wait, I got to go inside first, then outside, because otherwise I will be hypervigilant and want my ducks in a row from, one side of the world to all the other side of the world. And I'm going to drive myself crazy because I can't have all my ducks in a row. I can't control everything in that grand of a scale.
Whenever you talk about the internal and going internal, I don't have a clinical background in psychology, just psychology. I'm hearing it like, for me, the internal is that it's not clear. My emotions about something, like I know that it could be a wave and I'm just going to ride it. Whatever part of it that is happens to come up in this instant, okay, I'm going to address it. And if it changes, that's okay. It's very uncertain. Like even the 5 stages of grief isn't actually, it's not as linear as we
No, it's like
kind of
1 and then
envision it
five
as.
and then 3 and then 2 and then back
And
to
then
1.
maybe there's an extra one that we don't even
Yeah.
think about, or we don't experience all of them. The scary thing of doing internal work maybe is that you're not sure what you're going to find and it could change often. Would you agree with that being part of internal world?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And that's primarily why millennials and Gen Zers are so addicted to knowing something outside themselves, because they don't know how to ground themselves internally, what that even looks like, what skills are needed to go internal first and then put it up against the external world to see how it kind of weighs out. And it is extremely daunting because the way that their whole world exists is I define myself based upon how others see me, how
Mm.
others view me. Even the most religious of people will kind of see things through that lens. And it's not their fault necessarily. It's just the way that I think that their skill level has been formed being a part of an internet generation. Even a common cold, you go to the internet to see how to treat the cold, what to do with the cold, what the cold can turn into. And then all of a sudden you have given yourself a cancer diagnosis because there's just too much
Yeah.
information on the internet that you can't process with any amount of calm, rational, internal mechanisms that you've developed. You just can't do it, right? You don't have the skills to do that. So part of the work is to learn how to go internal and be grounded, even if you don't know anything, right?
Mm.
I think in our pre-interview, we talked about the term self-efficacy, right? So it is the belief in yourself that you can get through anything relatively unscathed to the other side and be okay, even if you don't know, right? But you do know that I'll be okay somehow.
Mhm.
I'll get through it somehow. Some areas you have a high self-efficacy, and other areas you might have a lower self-efficacy, but that skill is what I think is kind of lacking right now. It's just not been taught. Like, I don't know. I don't think I'm going to be okay. So because I'm not going to be okay and it's getting hard, I'm just going to quit. I'm just going to leave,
Mm.
roll. away from it. I'm going to shut it off and shut down. And so I don't know any other way to kind of really get through something that's hard.
Talking about the internal groundedness that you're saying, the self-efficacy, can you say what that looks like in like a mentally healthy or someone who has overall wellness, what
Mhm.
that would look like, especially maybe those who are anxious or experience depression? What does it look like? And then how do you get there if you're not there yet?
Mhm. Well, I can give an example, a clinical example. I've had patients who have high anxiety, and the anxiety is symptomatic of existing with panic attacks. So multiple panic attacks a week or one a day or those kinds of things. And the triggers are very specific. And one trigger for one particular woman was actually going to mass and getting up and going to communion. She felt like she was going to have a panic attack in the communion line, faint, draw attention to herself, and be embarrassed. The inordinate fear was, I'm not going to be able to do this, right? I have
Mhm.
such anxiety around not being able to escape or being trapped in this kind of situation where I couldn't get out of it without fainting. The groundedness of self is that fear is largely composed of what others thought of her.
Mm.
The embarrassment of fainting, the embarrassment of attention being drawn to her, so on and so forth, right? If you flip that on its head and say, okay, yeah, I'm going to faint, and people are going to come to my aid. People are going to tell me really positive things like, you're going to be okay. And we're here with you. And are you okay? Do you need some water? And let me help you up. And wow, that must have been really scary and hard for you. Rather than the self judgment that we think that people are thinking is, oh my gosh, what an idiot. She fainted, she fainted while going up to communion. What the heck is wrong with her? Right?
Mhm.
That's not what people are thinking. But
Mhm.
because we have that negative self-judgment on ourselves, that's what we would think about ourselves, right? That's what we project onto others.
Mm.
So again, to be okay, I am okay. I can get through this. Even if I faint, even if the worst possible things happen, I will be relatively okay. And I say the word relatively because it's relative for everyone, right? Okay.
Mhm.
And I would be able to get through it, even though it would totally be not the most pleasant experience, but I would be okay. And if you have that internal sense that I have strength and skills to begin with first, then you're a lot nicer on yourself. You're less
Mhm.
judgmental. And then you're not going to project that onto other people. And you can really, really assuage those fears in terms of like, no, I can do this. I can push through and get to the other side.
Question for you. Do you think it's helpful if someone is telling you this as well? Like if someone's sharing that with you, like this fear of theirs. Like I think back whenever I was a teacher during COVID, and I
Mm,
would I would tell my students like you can do hard things. You can do
right.
hard things. I know
Yes.
this is hard, but you can do hard things. Is that helpful? Like that kind of
Absolutely.
like coaching mentality?
Absolutely. That the telling, right? But then also the experiencing that I can do hard things and then the retelling back to self,
Mm.
right? Because then the dependence again is on you externally for you to keep telling me that. And if you're not there, then I'm not going to have anybody tell me that. But if
Mhm.
I can tell that to myself that yes, I can push through this and I know that it's hard and I'm super fearful, but I can do this and I don't know what's going to happen. And I think that that's the biggest thing I see so often is this addiction to I have to know in order for me to do. That's new. It used to be like, well, I have no idea, but I guess I'll figure it out. I guess I'll just do
Mm.
it and then I'll just figure it out later and I'll be okay. I don't see that as much anymore. I see a lot of low risk taking in terms of I need to know first that for a long period of time, like forever, things are going to be okay before I try to attempt something. That's why I think that especially the workforce is seeing young people quit jobs so quickly because the minute
Mm.
they have a bad day, they're like, well, this isn't what I thought it was going to be. I don't think that I like this anymore. And so I don't know how to proceed. So yeah.
I feel like I see that in the dating scene here in LA that people
Yeah.
people, it's really hard to get past a certain threshold where, or even in friendship, you have a difficult conversation. And where I'm from, like I'm from a small town. So like
Right.
you
Yeah.
have, you have to like work it out with certain
Yeah.
people
Yeah.
because there's only so many people.
Hmm.
So I've had to work it out and kind of wrestle with friendship. And like I don't see that here. Like
Hmm.
there've been more times where I'm like cast out
Yeah.
here than ever than living in Louisiana. And so that's a new experience for me. Like you said, like it's this giving up culture, this
Yeah.
and again, not anybody's fault. Like
Uh-uh.
I definitely I see it as a poverty almost. And when I was discerning to stay in LA, I was like, oh, this is a poverty that I want to serve. And there are just people who I know that I can love well. It is sad to see though, because I mean, it's got to come from somewhere. There's some sort of suffering, at least in my perception of it. I think there's some sort of suffering that people have experienced, and they don't believe that people could be good or have good intentions in a relationship or in friendship. That seems like a scary world to live in. I don't know.
It is. And I think that, enter social media where nothing's messy and everything is beautiful. And this is what your life needs to look like.
Hmm.
And not all social media people are like that. And I think it's gotten better, but it's also the comparison game is a good game to play to learn from.
Hmm.
Like, okay, yeah, I'll compare myself to that so I don't do that behavior and I want to emulate this behavior. And I think that that's okay. But to the degree that it is happening now, that we compare ourselves to people that we have no business comparing ourselves to, right? We can learn a little bit from them, but really there's no, it's like not even apples to oranges. It's like apples to, I don't know,
Zebra.
zebra, right? Like it's not even a rational comparison, but that's where we go. And so when friendships aren't happy-go-lucky all the time, and you're not validated externally all the time, and that friend is not singing your praises all the time, or giving you some negative feedback, like, hey, can you not put your dishes in the sink and just wash them and put them away? People crumble because they
Hmm.
just, well, she hates me. It's
Hmm.
this extreme kind of thinking that it's really all or nothing. I can't work through that. I don't even know how to work through that because she must hate me, right?
Hmm.
And that's where the internal connection is suffering, because you're like, if you had an internal connection and knew your orientation in space and time and who you were really deeply, you would say, well, I'm not hateable. I'm a good person.
Hmm.
I'm not the sum of my behaviors.
Hmm.
So even if I left the dishes in the sink, that's not who I am. That's just a behavior that I did, a mistake that I made.
Hmm.
So why would someone hate me for that? Because I don't hate myself for that, right?
Yeah.
I'm very forgiving of self because I know who I am. I know that I'm a good person that made a mistake. You talk about suffering. That's what I see a lot as well, is this, I don't know how to be gentle on myself. And so I will automatically assume everyone else is being just as hard on me as I am.
It definitely seems like an unrealistic expectation of self oftentimes. Like if someone expects themselves to be perfect and they're going to be hard on themselves for making a mistake, then I feel and maybe I'm wrong, but they're going to do that to other people. Like
Absolutely.
if they expect themselves to be perfect, they expect everyone to be perfect. All this call out culture but the people who I like to be around are generous of heart.
Hmm.
They recognize that, someone can make a mistake and that you can talk to me about it and then we can try to move forward from there. And it's like a reciprocal gift of generosity. Honestly, that's how I look for roommates, is like, do they offer any kind of sense that they're a generous person? Like for me, usually something like, okay, well, if this doesn't work out, I totally understand. Or if you need to move forward with someone else, I totally understand. To me, okay, now I want to live with you because you're the
Yeah.
person showing that generosity
Right.
of
Right.
heart. So what you expect of yourself, you expect of others, and that affects your relationships.
Hmm. And human relationships are messy. They are the messiest, hardest things that you can enter into with the greatest reward, right?
Mm.
And so again, unless we have a sense that, yeah, I am efficacious in relationships. I will keep going and keep going, even though I don't know what the heck I'm doing, right? All I know is that I want the redemption that's on the other side.
Mm-hmm.
I want the redemption of the suffering, and the suffering is going to be worth it. I don't want the smooth, glassy ice rink that is just easy to skate on all the time, right? And that, as Catholics, we see suffering as bearing fruit always, as
Mm-hmm.
something that is always going to be redemptive. And that is very helpful in counseling and being a Catholic counselor when you can talk in that language.
Mm-hmm.
As a secular therapist, I wouldn't be able to talk like that. I wouldn't be able to talk to women in terms of like, yeah, you can get through this, and the suffering is going to bear a lot of fruit for you.
Mm-hmm.
And what your anxiety, your depression, your trauma is a cross, and that
Mm-hmm.
cross will always bring you closer to the Lord. Your increase in virtue, right? So not to be all or nothing, or extreme one way and extreme another way, to just kind of stay in that Aristotelian mean of virtue, that like I can actually strive for excellence. That's a good thing. But when it starts to lead to the vice of perfectionism or the vice of sloth, and that's not a good thing, right? But I can stay
Mm-hmm.
in that middle ground. And so those are all really wonderful pieces of being a Catholic women's counselor, that I think that, you know, in our world right now, when we offer therapy in a secular way, that's not talked about.
Thank you for bringing up the Aristotelian mean of virtue. I taught that to my high school students when I was on our virtue lesson, to see virtue not as the opposite of vice, but the mean between the vice of deficiency and the vice of excess. So thanks for bringing that up in this context. I love that. As we kind of close out this interview, you kind of mentioned like being a Catholic therapist and how it's different from secular counseling. We kind of talked about the model for flourishing with Divine Mercy University. What would you say is different about being a Catholic counselor that you were saying you're thankful that you get to integrate into your practice, but also what is something that a listener, what is something that they need, especially the Catholic women, to integrate into their lives for flourishing, and what you see, especially in the context of anxiety, depression, or trauma?
Boy, that's a good question, and it has a lot, maybe another podcast even. It has a lot to it. I think the first and foremost reason that I put myself out there as a Catholic therapist, especially for women, is that our faith is such a tool, right? And so it is a tool that we can use, as well as all the other psychological tools that therapy offers. It also speaks to relationship. And like I said, the messiness is of relationship. A lot of secular therapists will just say, if there's a toxic relationship in your life, then you need to just X that person out of your life, and you don't even have to forgive them. Rub them out, erase them, you know. And that's hard when you're dealing with parents or siblings that really, they want to engage in some kind of relationship. They don't want to X those people out of their lives.
Mm-hmm.
They want to learn how to, even in the midst of a difficult personality, try to redefine what that relationship looks like, and eventually get to the point of forgiveness and redemption, and to work through those things, right? That really speaks to the not all or nothing, that you can have things that are really in the middle. It doesn't have to be I'm friends with this person, or I'm not friends with this person, right? What are those things? What are those things? So forgiveness and suffering, virtue. As a secular therapist, I wouldn't even be able to talk about any of those things, right? And as much as faith is a tool to really look at yourself as a whole person. I'm not just my emotions, and I'm not just my thoughts. I'm also my spirituality, and how that plays in the therapeutic context.
And what would you tell someone who's maybe like, suffering with anxiety or experiencing depression? You know, like the first thing that comes to mind for me is like the virtue of hope.
Mhm.
And, you know, there's some research that I've read when I was, you know, working on my grief intervention for my population, which is sibling survivors of abortion, that it kind of alludes to, oh, sibling survivors of abortion could never move on with their life because of XYZ. And it's something that I have to disagree with as a Catholic. I have to believe in the resurrection. For me, my sibling died by abortion, and I have to believe that they're with the Lord, and that even though it was the greatest grief of my life, that the Lord can do something with it, and, you know, the
Right.
ministry can continue. my life can continue. I can move on in a way that's fruitful for me and hopefully others. But the research would say, oh, they can't move on, not like siblings who died by miscarriage. It's
Right.
just totally
Right.
different, which it might be totally different, but I don't think
Yeah.
that it's impossible to move on.
No, I think you bring up a good point by looking at hope as a virtue. The other virtues that we talk about, are gratitude and surrender and trust. I mean, those are the antidotes to anxiety,
Mm,
right? So when you talk about I can't know. So what do I have to do? I have to trust and I have to surrender. And what does that even look like, right?
mhm,
Sometimes when we bring trust and surrender up to people that are dealing with anxiety, that makes them more anxious. You're like, don't
mm,
ask me to trust or surrender. That just makes me more anxious.
mhm,
Until we look at it through the eyes of virtue, through the eyes of our faith, that says, no, it's not a letting go. It is a letting someone take care of you.
mm,
It's a welcoming in. So if you surrender to someone, Jesus, your faith, another really significant person in your life, you're actually letting them take care of you, right?
mhm.
And that is something that really does need to be seen through a Catholic and Christian lens, because otherwise it would make no sense. So in this generation that's really addicted to knowing, I always start with, well, what do you know? What are the things that you know? And as a Catholic, we know, of our faith, of our salvation, that we are a child of God first, that He created us first, and that in those things, we have enough to really connect internally to who we are in those things and move forward.
Yeah, I really feel for those who are Catholic or like relate to it because of their upbringing, but there's some disconnection between them and that truth.
Mhm.
And so I really try to leave space for people who are still wrestling with that. I believe that any good that comes from me is because the fact I'm a beloved daughter of the Father.
Right.
But for those who that doesn't resonate with them quite yet, what would you say to them?
I think that you bring up a good point, because it's easy for some people to say that I'm a beloved daughter of the Father, but what if I had a crappy father, earthly father, right? It's hard for me to resonate with that, or to trust that, or to trust something that is greater outside of myself, right?
Mhm,
I guess my biggest route in counseling then would be not to worry about that. Not to worry about that. That's not your job, is to, pursue that relationship. It's the job of God to pursue that relationship with you.
mhm,
And when the time is right, that will all make sense. So
mhm,
let's work on the psychological piece of that. Let's work on the things that are beautiful within you now, that can help you with this anxiety. And that might be some just very good psychological skill building and
mhm,
cognitive behavioral work that eventually will lead to them asking more about the spiritual realm. Any good Catholic therapist will not impose their Catholicity onto a patient, right? Ever,
sure,
myself included. It is always at the request of the client who is in the office, saying that this is what I need more of. But to ignore it completely and not ever bringing it into the
sure.
discussion, I think is a misnomer as well. So
Yeah, I know I've been blessed by Catholic therapists, and whatever kind of shade of Catholic they've been, I've at least been grateful that they have an understanding of God, and that being a driver in my life, I guess it helps me in my decision-making processes. Although I was extraordinarily blessed with one particular Catholic therapist, which actually I went to spiritual direction for something, and the priest actually encouraged me to go to this particular therapist, and they said, "Look, I'm going to talk to you about this in this way for sure, but that sounds like something that you really need to unpack with a mental health professional." And it didn't come off as dismissive in any way. It came off as, okay, I care about you. And I think this is kind of the way probably a therapist wouldn't say, like, "Oh, this is a specialty thing. I need to refer you out to someone who has
right.
that specialty." That's what it felt like. And I felt very cared for. And I'm very thankful for the work of Catholic therapists. And I know there are a lot of people looking for Christian and Catholic therapists. So thank you for what you do for young people, probably. I don't know if that's their only clientele, but
It's most of it. Yeah.
I would say, I think, yeah, probably young people. Actually, the last thing I know we probably said that was the last thing was the last thing, but I wanted to talk a little bit about the neurological opposite of trauma being play. Is there anything you want to cover with that, with the idea of play being the opposite of trauma?
I don't know if it's the opposite of trauma, but it's a good antidote for trauma, right? So the more that we encourage what Jonathan Haidt and other psychologists are calling risky play, and that is not self-harming play. That is just, letting them fall and skin their knees, letting them do something that you as a mother or as a father would be like, no, 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 that's too high. You're gonna hurt yourself, so come back down, rather than just let them kind of experience what that's like to play in a way that they might have a negative outcome per se. Okay. That is not life threatening, but just a negative outcome.
Mm-hmm.
That does a couple of things. One is that then you're not internalizing it as something that is done to you. You are an actor in that play. So therefore you have that, like, well, I did this and therefore I can recover from it. And it's not that bad.
Mm-hmm.
Also, it increases that self-efficacy that we were talking about earlier, right? So
Mm-hmm.
the more self-efficacy you have, you crash on your bike and you're like, yeah, I crashed on my bike and boy, look at all these great war wounds that I have on my knee and it was awesome, right? Rather than I crashed on my bike, the parents think it's the worst thing in the entire world, it's awful. Then they start to internalize that as, yeah, that was awful. It was done to me. I am a recipient of it rather than an actor in it. And the more that you are a recipient in life, a passive player, then yeah, the more that everything is going to be traumatic for you.
Yeah.
So yeah, so that I think is even as adults, even as young adults, in terms of just doing something that's kind of scary,
Mm-hmm.
and doing it and just taking that risk and taking more risks, even if you fall flat on your face, right? As a performer, you know that so well that your efficacy in performing has to be super, super high because there's been times where it didn't go well, right? You have a beautiful voice, so I don't think that was many times, but I think that all of those things kind of culminate in I can do this and I can take these risks.
I did see something online recently where the therapist's homework to someone was do risky, like
Mhm.
kind of socially awkward things and
Yeah,
see what happens. And I think one day it was, ask people in a grocery store for $20. I think I saw one too where she laid on a yoga mat just kind of on a busy street corner.
yeah, yeah,
And so I think those kind of assignments are funny, but
yeah,
I think it kind of points to what you're saying, like do something risky. And it's weird to think of like play as an adult as well. Like I've always kind of joked, like now I live close to Disneyland. I've always joked that
yeah,
going to Disneyland is like me like reliving my childhood, I guess. And like I
yeah,
still dress up and wear ears and all of that stuff.
yeah.
And I don't know if there's psychology behind that, but I do like those environments where am allowed to be childlike and
You give
like,
yourself permission to be that way, and you allow
yes,
yourself to be vulnerable in that way, knowing that you're not going to get hurt because you're good. You're inside, you're good. So even if something, even if somebody looks at you sideways, like, why is she wearing Mickey Mouse ears? You'd be like, I don't care. I'm good, And
yeah.
so I think that our children teach us, and we can teach children those same things. I mean, I think that I never got on a roller coaster until I had kids. Speaking of Disneyland, right? And it was the kids that allowed me to really encourage me to get on a roller coaster with them. And I didn't want
Mhm.
to. And I did, and it was great. So I think that those things help us get through uh, not being so traumatized all the time by everything, because everything is not awful. Negative
Mhm.
outcomes are not awful and traumatizing. They don't need to be. They are things that help us learn and help us grow and help us find inner strength that we can carry on. Yeah.
What a great reframe. Thank you so much for everything that you're sharing, for your expertise and for your work over these last a couple of decades. I mean, this
Well,
is
yeah, almost 3 decades, I hate to say, but yeah. And I think that just if I had any parting words for young listeners out there, it says on my website even that only healthy people go to therapy. It's the unhealthy ones that never go. It's just a good supportive atmosphere to hopefully work through something that you might be feeling stuck in or think that is unredeemable or not fixable. You are the ultimate fixer of your things. You are in good hands with the divine physician to begin with. So, yeah.
Very empowering. Thank you so much. Hope to have you back one day,
Oh,
Darilyn.
I would love it.
Yes,
Okay.
maybe we should have that other episode next year.
Several. Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you again so much, and God bless. I hope you have a good rest of your week.
Thanks, Krista.